race on Sunday. Driver Bubba Wallace suspended one race for this on-track incident with Kyle Larson and all that followed in Sunday's event in Las Vegas. So let's begin the conversation there. And this is obviously big news, and there were people all over social media wondering what would the penalty be for Bubba Wallace. We now know it's a one-race suspension. Your reaction to this?
Yeah, we were all waiting on this because there's no standard, right? We don't see this a lot in NASCAR, and NASCAR gets put in a really tough position when a driver does something like this because there's not a cheat sheet. It doesn't say, hey, if you do this, like a tire coming off, you get this many races. So they had to go back to the drawing board, evaluate the whole situation. The one-race suspension, to me, I think Bubba got away with some things there that maybe should have been addressed. Monetarily, there's no fine on that. Like I mentioned yesterday on our show, I walked to the ambulance for my car and got a $20,000 fine. So I think there's some things to figure out there. I'm okay with the one-race suspension. Maybe it should have been the rest of the year. I don't really know how to address it because we don't see this a lot, and I think that's kind of the position NASCAR's in here.
Yeah, I think we all thought one race seemed okay. I'm with you, Trevor. I'm kind of surprised it wasn't addressed, him walking from the car, walking on the racetrack, walking on the apron. He walked a long way, and then he didn't get into the emergency vehicle to go to the infield care center right away. He walked across pit road. Usually we see that addressed. So I'm a little surprised there wasn't some money for Bubba as well. But the 1 week, I think all of us in the industry kind of thought that might be coming. What he did was pretty bad and pretty unacceptable.
What's the balance of suspensions in NASCAR? Because I just gave it there in our daily fuel. Ben Bayshore and Kyle Busch loses a tire. The crew chief is gone for 4 races. We've seen that happen countless times this year and last year where a crew chief is gone for 4 races. Bubba Wallace does this and gets 1 race. How do you balance all that out, Drew?
That's tough. There's 35 of us, 36 of us on pit road, and 20 of us have been gone for
a vacation,
for a wheel coming off. That I'm sitting about 20 feet away from that, and I didn't touch a part on that car, when it came off, and we obviously don't want it to come off, so we're not telling our guys to possibly leave them loose, right? So that's a hard one to swallow as a crew chief. I think in the name of safety, NASCAR cracked down, trying to make sure they made a stand to make sure we don't have loose wheels. That's something that we obviously don't want to have. But the truth of it is that the show goes on if I'm not there. Having the driver away from the show, that's a little harder for the sport, for the racetrack, for the industry, and that's part of what NASCAR has to look at.
Well, and the reasoning for that is to set a standard, right? They know that those crew chiefs, you guys are going to crack down on your crews and say, listen, I don't want to be sitting at home for 4 weeks. Get that wheel on, get the lug nut on, and you know the consequence if you don't. That's the difficult part here that I was mentioning. A driver doesn't know, other than evaluating, is this risky? Is this going to hurt somebody? Which, in that moment, Bubba wasn't thinking about that. He should have been, but he wasn't. Wrecks Kyle Larson big time and could have hurt him for sure. That was a bad position. I said yesterday, if Christopher Bell's not there, he backs that car and maybe he ends up with Bowman and Kurt Busch on the hurt list. So I don't think that was a good move by any means, but I think we've got to figure out, how do we know what this penalty is going to be if somebody does something like that? So a driver can weigh that when he's coming off the corner and he's seeing red and he's mad. He knows, if I do this, I'm in trouble and I'm sitting at home for a few weeks.
The other part of that is Ben Bayshore can do part of his job from a war room, from Cornelius, where Joe Gibbs is at. He can do part of his job still. The driver can't.
That's right.
So NASCAR understands that. They know that. They're not trying to take that away from the teams or the crew chiefs. So if I'm sitting at home for 4 weeks, I can still do a lot of my job. I just can't physically be at the racetrack.
But this isn't the first time that a driver has been suspended for something that happened on track. We've got a list of some of those that have happened, really last 10, 12 years. And the 2 that will jump out, 1, Kyle Busch, Truck Series race at Texas, got into Ron Hornaday. NASCAR came back. That happened on a Friday night. NASCAR came back, said you can't race Saturday or Sunday. And, of course, we all remember what happened in the playoffs with Matt Kenseth and Joey Logano. He also got 2 races. Here, Bubba gets 1. Is there any way to fairly compare what we see on this board with what happened with Bubba, given all the conversations going on in the sport right now revolving around safety in this car?
Yeah, this is a really hard apples-to-apples comparison, just like William Byron and Denny Hamlin, right? He wrecked him on the front stretch at Texas, and it looked kind of similar, but it was slow speed. Same with Matt Kenseth at Martinsville. Same with Kyle Busch under caution with Ron Hornaday. So I think NASCAR did a good job of going back and looking and saying what's going on here, but I think they might have missed a little bit on comparing those as far as races missed. You know, with Matt Kenseth, they thought it was more valuable that he wrecked Joey out of the playoffs than it was that Bubba wrecked, you know, Kyle Larson at 175 miles an hour. And that's why I say we need a standard here of some sort. But what I don't want to do is turn this conversation on NASCAR, because Bubba's the one that put him in this spot. And I think we've got to look and say, is one race enough to teach him and every other driver that wrecking somebody under green is just not okay, no matter which way you look at it. Instead of saying, does the punishment meet the crime, we got to say, does this punishment teach drivers enough to say this cannot happen anymore? Does that $40,000 that he's going to miss out on winnings next week and not, you know, being at the racetrack, is that enough to say, guys, this cannot happen anymore?
Well, now that we know the outcome, let's go back and hear what both drivers said after the incident on Sunday. We've also got a statement for Bubba Wallace. Let's start with their reaction coming out of the Care Center in Las Vegas.
He tried to clear me, and it's nowhere clear, and just stayed in the gas. I lifted, and it was too late at that point, and he just ran us into the fence. Everything broke, and we were wadded up.
When you get shoved into the fence, like deliberately like he did, trying to force me to lift, steering was gone, so just so happened to be there.
He had a fast car, and felt like, you know, me getting him into the wall was ending his day, so he ended both of ours. But yeah, just like I said, it is what it is. I would have been frustrated as well. I just don't think that I would have hooked him down the straightaway, especially with everything that's been going on here lately with, you know, injuries and such.
This is the statement that Bubba Wallace put out last night. I want to apologize for my actions on Sunday following the on-track incident with Kyle Larson and the 5 car. My behavior does not align with the core values that are shared by 23XI Racing and our partners who have played a crucial role in my incredible journey to the top of this great sport. I want to apologize to NASCAR and the fans, along with Christopher Bell, Joe Gibbs Racing, and Toyota, for putting them in a situation in the playoffs that they do not deserve. I compete with immense passion, and with that passion at times comes frustration. Upon reflecting, I should have represented our partners and core team values better than I did by letting my frustrations follow me outside of the car. You live and learn, and I intend to learn from this. That's from Bubba Wallace in 23XI. Now I go the route of Denny Hamlin, because Denny is the car owner, and we know he's been very outspoken when it comes to safety in recent weeks. We've not heard from Denny yet on what happened Sunday. Are you surprised Denny's not weighed in at this point?
Yes and no. Yes, because Denny's been very vocal on everything. No, because this is a matter that's taking place within his own home here. He can have an effect on this situation and not have to get on Twitter and do it. If Denny feels like, hey, NASCAR's not listening to me, then he's going to take to Twitter to get some more voices going and get this conversation stirred up. But in this case with Bubba, he's got his ear. He's in that meeting with him. You know, they're flying home or they're doing whatever, and he has control of this situation of what happens with Bubba. And I think that's the approach he's taking, which is probably the right approach in this aspect, because we all want Bubba to learn from this. And I think this whole week of having to listen to us talk about it, listen to everybody break it down, that's one of the worst parts about making a mistake, is being criticized, right? Even maybe more than sitting at home for a week. So I think Denny's going to handle this in-house, and that's probably the right approach.
Yeah, I assumed as soon as I read the statement from Bubba last night that Denny had a major play in getting that out there. And I am sure there were deep conversations in the 23XI doors, in their walls yesterday, talking about this, talking to Bubba about what happened and how they're going to fix it. And I'm hoping Denny stayed quiet yesterday and going in today to find out what NASCAR was going to do. I'm sure they didn't learn much before we learned of what the circumstance was, or Bubba was going to miss a race. So now that it's out, I would expect to hear from Denny. If not, I'm sure he's going to get bombarded this weekend at the racetrack and hear Denny's take on it, because I am sure not only was Denny's Toyota teammate taken out in the incident, but a car that could have won the race and maybe was still okay to go on and run well was taken out for little or no reason.
You guys know as well as I do, this garage typically 9 times out of 10 is self-policing. NASCAR does not want to get involved. And a couple of weeks ago, I said it. Denny Hamlin led the charge, but it was the biggest names. Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, Chase Elliott, all very outspoken about where we are with this car in regard to safety. Changes are being made for 2023. Yeah. Having said all of that, what's going to be the fallout in the garage for Bubba after what we saw at speed at a place like Las Vegas?
I think his peers are going to be very disappointed. I would expect them to be. I wouldn't blame them. This is a good old boy kind of club that's going on. And when those top 12 guys that run up front every week get someone thrown in, you've seen it with Ross Chastain this year. You see it with Bubba Wallace recently. Guys that run up there that haven't run up there for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, they better mind their P's and Q's, because it's a club. And those guys don't expect you to ruffle feathers if you're new to the game. Joey Logano went through it a few years ago. Now you're seeing Ross Chastain go through it. And now Bubba just ruffled a lot of feathers.
Yeah, and in this position, as I watch this replay over and over, I just keep thinking about how you have to use so much discernment when you're on the racetrack, and how every situation is so much different. I mean, fans that don't know anything about NASCAR, they're like, you ever get bored running 300 laps, like same thing over and over? But every lap is different and every situation is different. If Bubba waits till turn 1 and spins Larson out, no big deal. That happens. That you can, turn somebody. But when you go down on the apron and somebody's got that big of a running start on the front stretch, totally different. And we know that, right? Because we're around the sport.
Yes.
Instead of the fan that says, what's the difference in, Joey moving Byron at Darlington or anything? There's a huge difference here. And that's just kind of one of those good old boy, like you're talking about, right, unspokens that you just know there's certain things you don't do. And this is one of those.
Yeah, there were a lot of people on pit road that looked up at the big screen after that caution came out, and everyone in the sport thought, that's not good.
Ooh, yeah,
not one of them thought otherwise.
We've got Radioactive later.